deaths, we want to reduce harm, we want to save lives and ensure that people are happy, healthy, and have access to treatment and resources. And some people, they want to reduce the rates of drug use, but that is an impossible task. That's something that we just can't do. We have over 100 years of data, whatever it is. It's simply another form of prohibition, except the, let's say, the use of it or the carrying. In the instance of a drug, you can carry up to a certain amount legally, and this doesn't always protect the user, and you're going pretty deep. You want to have as many medicines as possible. Let's say you get injured, right? You might want to have some painkillers prepared on the spot, but with the whole stigma around opiates right now, that's gonna be very hard to get a doctor to give you opioids. So the point here is that the underground market will exist when a certain amount of regulations end up making it profitable enough for the drug traffickers, the dealers, essentially the criminals, the people that sell drugs. When it is profitable enough for them to sell these drugs and to compete with legal companies, that's when the underground market can exist. So that's why with cannabis, we still have underground markets for cannabis in states where it's legal, such as, let's say, Washington State. When I was in high school, there were a lot of people selling weed, and that's normal for a high school, right? But think about it like this. There are also people selling weed over 21, and the people that are, let's say 19, 20, that can easily get it from someone they know or from someone else. But the point is, these people are able to sell underground in the black market illegally. Technically, they're technically criminals, and you're technically selling an unregulated drug, and that could theoretically be very dangerous. With most other drugs, there's going to be a bunch of impurities, but it's not a huge deal with cannabis. The point being, they're technically criminals, and they are technically, but the reason they're doing this is because they can easily compete with the dispensaries. The dispensaries have a bunch of regulations. They have a bunch of standards, procedures, and things that they have to follow and do, because these random laws make them do it, and it's expensive. It makes costs high, and that's the reason that cannabis is so damn expensive in the dispensaries, because the average individual, unless they are a person that owns a dispensary, or I'm not sure if it's the same for growers, but I know dispensaries, they can buy cannabis in bulk, and that gets them about 3 to 4 times lower price, according to what I looked up. I mean, if you own a dispensary, feel free to correct me if you have better numbers, but the point is, whatever number it is, doesn't have to be precise. The people that own dispensaries, they're able to take advantage of bulk discounts. People can do that with alcohol and nicotine because it's very loose. People don't care that much. But we can't do that with cannabis, and so the people that buy cannabis, they're forced to buy it in smaller amounts, usually below an ounce. And that means that people have to pay the highest price for the cannabis that they're buying, because they buy it in the smallest amount, they don't get any bulk discount. There might be some small bulk discounts for, saying buying an ounce, but that's nothing compared to getting a 3 to 4 times discount for buying a pound, or let's say 10 pounds. There are people that, might want to stock up, and if they could buy, say, a pound at a time, save some money, it's not a bad deal for them. But we can't do that with cannabis, and thus, because we can't take advantage of these bulk discounts, the price of cannabis, was higher, and also the fact that the regulations, all the standards that they have to follow, makes prices super high. A bunch of just unnecessary, tedious procedures, that politicians and lawmakers make these dispensaries go through. And in some places, it's progressively getting better, but for now, these dispensaries have to sell cannabis at a very high price, because there's just a lot of upkeep, especially with all of those, fees that they have to pay. So now we've been talking about the underground market a good bit. I'd like to mention that if you legalize every single drug, you get rid of the underground market. There's no violence. There's a lot less overdoses because the drugs that are sold are going to be regulated, pure, accurately measured. They're going to have labels, as I mentioned earlier. All of these drugs are going to be safe. People are going to know how to use them because there's going to be resources available online. And when a drug is legalized, it's not stigmatized as much. And thus people are going to be able to be safer with it. If they need help, they're going to be less afraid to get help because they have no fear of prosecution, and they've got everything they need to be safe. So when you have all these resources, all this information, and all of this guidance, and all of this assistance, it's quite easy to not hurt yourself. It's quite easy to not die. It's quite easy to stay safe. It's what people need to stay safe, because without it, which people currently don't have it whenever they're consuming an illegal drug, they don't actually know what they're consuming, what the purity is, how what the measurement actually is. They don't know if it's laced with anything else. They don't know if there are contaminants. They don't know what's actually in it unless they get it tested at a lab, and that can be pretty expensive. But most people aren't going to do that because let's say they're just buying a small amount. Why would you get, let's say, $150, $200 lab test on, I don't know, a gram of cocaine, right? It doesn't make any sense. But the point is, when you legalize all these drugs, you end the underground market. Ender, come on, let's go. Let's go. Person over there. But anyway, you end the underground market when these drugs are legal because companies sell them instead of dealers, drug traffickers, criminals, and any type of drug trafficking organization, like the cartels, for example. The cartels would also go away. Well, if the drugs were legalized all around the world, because the cartels, they do business, America, Mexico, but in many other countries. If drugs were legal everywhere, the cartels wouldn't exist because they wouldn't be able to compete with the companies that are selling these legal, accurately measured, pure, and labeled products. It's just not something that cartels can compete with because nobody's going to want to buy a drug from the cartels that's impure. They don't know what the measurement is. It's variable. It might have contaminants. It might be laced. It might not even be the drug that they think it is. The point is, nobody's going to want to buy from the cartels because it's, first of all, going to be unsafe. But the fact that the cartels, you don't want to get murdered. You don't want to get executed. You don't want to get hung, have your head chopped off. Don't want to there is this one article I remember going crazy a while ago about this kid and his dad. The dad was decapitated next to the kid, and then the kid had his whole chest cut open with a knife. They were pulling out his organs. I don't know what the dad did to get on the cartel's bad side, but he killed this dad and his kid. It was pretty brutal. It was pretty fucking brutal. I saw the video. Not good. The cartels, they've been doing a lot of damage. They've been causing a lot of pain and suffering in Mexico. And it must be rough to be Mexican right now because you already know if somebody tries to advocate for drug legalization in the Mexican government, they're going to get assassinated so fucking fast. There's no way anybody in the Mexican government is going to survive more than one day if they advocate for drug legalization. Anybody that advocates for drug legalization in Mexico is fucking dead. So what do? Well, at this point, a lot of people have said this, and it might be the only option, but the United States might have to intervene in Mexico, because it's not just a Mexican problem, it's the United States and a Mexican problem, because a lot of the business is coming from or is going from Mexico to the United States, and so it's really a problem with both countries. And with the United States being just on the border of Mexico, Americans are affected as well from the cartels. Sometimes Americans go down to Mexico, they might have their truck stolen, might get murdered. There's a lot of violence down in Mexico right now. It's getting worse and worse, especially after since these last couple of decades. It's only gone increasingly worse. So the United States, they might have to do some military intervention. And ideally, in this scenario, if they were able to, let's say, I don't know, end some of the cartels, control some areas, and if drugs were legalized, that is ultimately the only solution to this. Then if we were able to take control of Mexico and get officials in that could legalize all drugs and then have companies begin producing drugs legally there, then that would be really the only solution. That's the only solution to end the cartels, because you've got to have these drugs legalized everywhere. But if you're going to get drugs legalized in Mexico, you're going to have to intervene with the military, because there's no way the government, which a bunch of them are already working with the cartel, prohibition, it invites a lot of corruption. And a lot of these people, they end up working with the cartels and the Mexican government. So there's no way the Mexican government by themselves is going to be able to legalize drugs and end the cartels, because the Mexican government is the cartel. At least a good amount of them, and enough of them that information flows. And ultimately, the cartels, they have the upper hand. They're doing better than the Mexican government is. And that was shown just a couple of years ago, maybe 3 years ago now, in the Battle of Culiacan, something like that. The Sinaloa cartel was in control of that city. The Mexican army tried to do a siege to capture El Chapo's son, Ovidio Guzman Lopez, and then they did capture him, but the Sinaloa cartel had taken a bunch of Mexican soldiers from the Mexican army hostage, and they threatened to execute all of them if the Mexican government did not return El Chapo's son, Ovidio Guzman Lopez. So they ended up returning El Chapo's son, Guzman Lopez, and they did return the Mexican soldiers, but essentially the result of the battle was a positive for the Sinaloa cartel. They successfully defended their area, their city, and they got El Chapo's son back. They essentially won the battle. And so this theme of the Mexican cartels essentially seeming to have more power and influence than the Mexican government is becoming frightening almost. The cartels are developing technology. They have trucks with turrets on them. They've got a lot of weaponry. They are stronger than the Mexican army. They might even have more numbers. They probably do, all the cartels combined. I don't know, I would say definitely. The Mexican government, also given the fact that a bunch of them are working with the cartel and are corrupt, I don't think there's much that the Mexican government can do at this point. The problem's infected the entire country, and I'm not sure if it's reversible from the inside. So now that we've got that out of the way, I don't really have much left to say on that at the moment. Let's see, what else do we have? Yes, economics. I've got a little list right here of a bunch of little things to talk about. This is very important. If these drugs are legalized, not only are a bunch of lives going to be saved, is a bunch of harm going to be just totally gone, because all the other aforementioned problems with prohibition and the safety of drugs. These drugs are going to be sold legally. That's going to generate a lot of tax revenue. It's going to generate a lot of wealth for American citizens, legal, innocent American citizens that are doing legal business, legal operations. The GDP of the country is going to go up. It's something like the United States spends on average 400 billion. Something like 400 billion on drugs, illegal drugs, every single year. So think about that. That's $400 billion added to the wealth of the country, and if it was taxed, you could add on an extra, well, if it was taxed, it would, well, this is difficult to calculate, because if it was legal, the prices of the drugs would be lower, but also a little bit more people might be using these drugs, depending on the drug, recreationally or medicinally, therapeutically, however it is. Psychedelics are becoming increasingly popular. It's difficult to calculate, but the point is, hundreds of billions of dollars are on the table for the United States to add to the wealth of the citizens, of everybody, and also a good amount of that is also going to be going to the taxpayers that we could be spending on treatment, resources, education, everything we need to make America better, to fix these problems, to ensure that less people are harmed from drug use and addiction, and to ensure that people who suffer from an addiction, substance use disorder, or any problem with drugs, we are able to have extra funding to go towards helping those people when they need it, because that's what's important. After all, Portugal, they reduced the overdose rate by 80% in their country from doing this, from enacting measures and providing resources like that. But alcohol prohibition didn't work. Cocaine, crack cocaine, heroin, fentanyl, every single drug you can name, it didn't work. Abortion didn't work. Abortion medicine didn't work. Prostitution didn't work. It's never worked. And the fact that we have become so comfortable with other people prohibiting things that interferes with bodily autonomy and what should be basic civil liberties, basic human rights, is quite astonishing. Because the fact that we've allowed people to prohibit these drugs, the fact that we've allowed people to prohibit prostitution, is the exact reason that we're having such a battle over abortion in the United States right now. It's because we've allowed ourselves to get comfortable with other people prohibiting things that affect nobody else but the individual. We've allowed politicians, lawmakers, and other people to prohibit things that interfere with basic civil liberties, basic human rights, bodily autonomy. It doesn't make sense that we prohibit drugs, because when I use a drug, when you use a drug, when anybody uses a drug, it doesn't affect the physical well-being of anybody else but the user. And it doesn't interfere with the rights of anybody. In the majority of situations, drug use is positive. About 80 to 90% of those that use a drug, 80 to 90% or more, don't get addicted, depending on the drug. With alcohol, it's about an 80% rate of, or 20% of people get addicted, so 80% don't get addicted. And it's a similar rate with heroin, I believe, somewhere around there, which is, it might be surprising, but the true reality is that drugs aren't inherently addictive. The root of every single addiction, this is a quote that somebody else said, but it's quite true based on my research, and the true root of every addiction is trauma. There's pain, struggle, and suffering behind every single addiction. People aren't just going to become drug fiends because they use a drug one time. There are many people that are capable of using drugs, and it definitely varies by drug. Some people are more susceptible to certain drugs than others. Some people like downers more, some people like uppers more. Not every drug is the same, but people aren't just going to become drug fiends because they used a substance. And also, sometimes people just need to run their course with the drug. Sometimes they need to experiment, figure it. If someone wants to try LSD, only telling them that they shouldn't try LSD is going to have their curiosity linger. You want to pique your curiosities, you want to get them out of the way so that you don't have to, be irresponsible. Let's say someone that's highly curious, that sounds so fucking bad, but the point is, LSD, I've tried it, it's interesting. I like psychedelics. Psilocybin, I tried it, it's interesting. DMT, I tried it, it's interesting. Salvia, I tried it, that's quite interesting. And also, let's see, I mean, I've tried some other substances. I like cannabis, but the point is, there's no shame in drug use. Sometimes you just gotta experiment with stuff, pique your curiosities, like I did. Piqued my curiosities with psychedelics. I'd like to try ayahuasca someday, ketamine, ibogaine, but there's no rush. And peyote too. But yeah, once again, there's no rush. I've already tried, 4 psychedelics. And cannabis, that's a mild psychedelic, a lot of people say. But I've already tried, 4 psychedelics. I'm not in a rush to try anything else. I've piqued my curiosities. I do have some things I still do want to try, but I've got plenty of time. And when I do try it, I want to do it legally so that it's as safe as possible. For example, with ayahuasca and peyote, I want to go down to the retreats in Peru, for example. With ketamine and ibogaine, I want to do some ketamine therapy, some ibogaine therapy in the United States or Canada, either one. I live in Washington State, so Vancouver, Canada is just a 3-hour, maybe 4-hour drive away, 3.5 hours, something like that. Point is, I do want to try some things, and I want to do it legally so it's safe, and it's the drugs that I'm consuming are made by pharmaceutical companies with regulations, standards, procedures, all of that. But it's also going to be more expensive. But because I've already tried a bunch of things, a lot about myself, I feel like, once again, I'm just in no rush. There's no need to try anything more and to continue try a bunch of drugs. But there was, a short moment when I first discovered the fact that all drugs weren't inherently bad, that I was kind of curious. I was like, oh shit, drugs aren't inherently bad. You can use drugs and be safe. You can use drugs and be responsible. And now I was all curious about all these different drugs. I wanted to research them all, and I was curious about what they were like. And with many of them, I had no intent of, using them repeatedly. Frequency is dangerous when it comes to drug use in pretty much a lot of situations. Most psychedelics, pretty much all psychedelics, are not addictive, but you don't want to really use them frequently because then they're just not as special, not as fun. And you also got to worry about tolerance. And also, because they're just so intense and powerful, and sometimes just so ridiculously mentally intensive, you don't want to use them for a good amount of time. A lot of people will wait several months, might even go years, or might even have a powerful psychedelic trip and never use a psychedelic ever again. Feel like they've learned everything they need to learn, like they've done it all. Most drugs, but pills, those are where you got to be careful. I know this is a video talking about drug legalization, but might as well get some drug education in here as well. Pills, you got to be careful with them, because pills, those are very easy to take. You eat them like candy. 1, 2, 3, 4, 10, 20, 50. Pretty soon you've eaten the whole bag. You're pretty fucked up, and it's not good. Next thing you know, you're fucking overdosing, foaming out the mouth, shitting your pants, pissing yourself, and you fucking got cops and paramedics all over you trying to bring you back to life with their, you know what I mean, like the, whatever you call it, the the electricity thing, you know what I mean, restarts your heart. Yeah, whatever. The point, you get it. The point is, you don't want to end up like that. Pills you gotta be careful with, because you can easily use them on a frequent basis. Let's take some type of sedative, for example, like Xanax. Worked for a while, but the anxiety, it progressively got worse and worse and worse and worse. And so eventually the exercise, it didn't help. My anxiety would only fade while I was exercising. So unless I was exercising 24/7, then my anxiety would still be present when I wasn't exercising. That's how bad it was. And exercise was almost not good enough. It was getting that bad. So I started taking Xanax to relieve this anxiety, and I was taking it every single day because the anxiety was just so fucking bad. And this Xanax, it did stop the anxiety. It stopped it, and it certainly relieved my pain. And I ended up taking it every day, but I slipped into this habit like almost unknowingly, and ended up using Xanax for maybe about a bit over 2 months. That's a good estimate. And I had started noticing that I was getting into this habit, and I was like, oh shit, I've been using Xanax for quite a while. So I stopped using the Xanax, and I just stopped using the Xanax. And when I stopped using it, my anxiety spiked super high. My anxiety was worse than it had ever been before. But this only lasted maybe a day, and it faded a lot the next day and the day after. It was maybe 2-3 days that I had, physical withdrawals. You become physically dependent to Xanax and many other pills quite quick. And I wasn't psychologically addicted whatsoever. Downers, they're not really my thing. If I were using any uppers, I would have to be more careful about that. So, that's why alcohol, I don't really care about drinking as much. I do drink every once in a while. I've got a bottle of whiskey at home, but I don't dip into it every night. Maybe once or twice a week, oftentimes less. The point is, downers aren't really my thing. I wasn't psychologically addicted at all, just physically dependent. There is a difference, and the difference is that physical dependence does not necessarily mean you're psychologically addicted. It just means you have physical withdrawals, you have a tolerance. And I would manage to get off the Xanax very easy, no bumps at all. Didn't, go back to it after that. Didn't use the Xanax at all. I did still have a tiny bit in my supply. So there were maybe 2 or 3 occasions where I took one pill. But they were, spaced out. Irresponsible drug use is what it was. Never had any problem with Xanax since, haven't bought any. Don't feel a need to use any. Not really interested in it. I don't like Xanax anyway because it lasts way too long and it's way too strong. It makes you pass the fuck out, and then you just sleep forever and you're just fucking passed out. You do not wake up to anything. Xanax, it's not a drug I would use for sleep. And if you're using it for anxiety, if you say have a bar, you want to split that up into a quarter, maybe even less. You don't want to take a whole bar because that's going to make you pass out. You only want to take a little bit for anxiety. And it is a good short-term solution. I'm not going to deny that. It was a good short-term solution for me. It definitely stopped a lot of anxiety, a lot of pain. But I did slip into that habit, and everything went well. I caught myself early. I noticed it, and I stopped, and nothing bad happened. I'm safe, I'm good, and nothing bad has happened since. So I'm not gonna act like Xanax is some evil drug, but you gotta be careful because you can slip into habits easy. That's the point of the whole story. You can slip into habits easy and you don't notice it. Especially when you've got a lot of pain and suffering that is behind it. If you've got some problem that you're trying to fix with the drug, this happens a lot with people that are using pain medication, say after a surgery or from some injury or whatever it is that they need pain medication for. A lot of these people, they slip into these habits with taking an opioid and they get addicted. Some of them become physically dependent and they catch themselves early and they get off, or their friends notice it, they help them get off and they notice it as well. There are many people that get off of it early before anything bad happens, but there are also just as many, if not more, people that, don't get off of it, become addicted, and end up, suffering from it. And this is why having a physical condition is one of the highest correlates to having an addiction, especially to opioids. Along with having a mental condition, having any type of, having pain, struggle, and suffering, and also being impoverished, and I believe minorities are also more likely to be addicted, since technically they are, a higher ratio. I believe black people, are poor. All that whole history stuff, how it works out with the whole slavery thing. Very unfortunate. But anyway, back to the main topic. Let's see. Next one. Well, I did mention this a little bit earlier, but I would like to enunciate it again. These drugs, they're not just substances that people use recreationally, they're medicines. Remember that, guys. These drugs are also medicines, just like the Xanax in my story. I was using it as a medicine, and it really helped. And it could have become a greater problem, but I stopped that problem from becoming a greater problem. That's a fucked up sentence, but whatever. Anyway, onwards. This is why decriminalization sucks, alright? Here, gotta let my dogs into the car. A lot of people wonder, why legalize all drugs when you could just decriminalize them? And that's a good question. But as mentioned earlier, decriminalization doesn't actually accomplish a lot. Ender, Rufus, come on up. It only makes it so that people are a little bit less afraid to go out and seek treatment because they don't have that fear of prosecution. And people also have less stigmatization around these drugs and around addiction to the drug. So people are also more likely to seek treatment because of that. There is data showing that people actually do seek treatment less when a drug is stigmatized, when it's illegal, when it's prohibited. So there is real data to prove that statement from this one book I was reading. I forget the exact name of the book, social something, related to stigmatization and statistics and all that. But the point is, here, let me get this back out real quick. Yeah, the point is, decriminalization, it sucks because it doesn't make the drug safer. There's an immense amount of problems, a huge list of them that we've been going over that are not solved by decriminalization, but they are solved by legalization. And many of them are also solved by efforts that are, not related to legalization, but can be supported, helped, assisted by legalization, such as providing treatment and resources through having the additional taxpayer dollars that could come from legalization. Having that extra funding could help us have more treatment. That is a possible, that is a way that legalization can support, the end goal of reducing addiction, harm, death, and all that. But next, we got to stop stigmatization. Stigmatization, it causes a lot of problems. As I just mentioned, stigmatization reduces the amount of people that seek treatment for addiction, substance use disorder, any type of drug problem. Maybe it's they're having some problem, in the moment of them using a drug. They might be experiencing some symptoms or effects that, make them concerned for their well-being. They might have taken too large of a dosage. They might be on the brink of overdosing, but they don't want to seek help because they're afraid of getting prosecuted. They're afraid of getting in trouble. They're afraid of legal trouble, fines, having to pay for paramedics, ambulance, medical bills, whatever it is. They might have any sort of problem that is fucked up that makes them not want to seek help and is ultimately causing them to risk their lives in order to avoid some result that they don't want to avoid, that they wouldn't even have to worry about if these drugs were legalized. So we need to stop stigmatization because, first of all, drug use is not inherently bad. It's not always bad. Remember, 80 to 90 or more % of people do not become addicted to these drugs. Something like, I think 95% of people don't become addicted to caffeine, so only 5% do. A lot of people do become dependent, but that's a different thing. Once again, being dependent isn't necessarily psychological addiction, and being physically dependent doesn't necessarily doesn't necessarily mean that you meet the criteria for substance use disorder of that drug, whether it be caffeine or an opioid, whatever it is. Dropped my little card down here. But yeah, this stop stigmatization thing, it's pretty simple. Really, we just need to stop stigmatizing drug users because it hurts everybody and helps nobody. People shouldn't feel ashamed to use drugs because it's just a natural thing that humans want to do. It's natural to want to alter our consciousness. Other animals alter their consciousnesses. Cats, they have catnip. There are other animals like jaguars, I think. They'll eat psychedelic plants. Many other animals eat psychedelic plants. I know reindeer, they like the amanita, whatever it's called. They'll eat that psychedelic. I think it's like a mushroom or something. But the point is, many other animals, they like to alter their consciousness. They enjoy consuming substances. Many other animals, they get drunk from eating whatever. I read about that a long time ago. I forget what animal it was and how they do it, but there are animals that get drunk through, natural nature means. And also, ancient societies have most definitely used a lot of psychedelics. They've used many other drugs. They've used opium, many different drugs, and psychedelics especially. Ancient societies and societies from, over 300, 400, 500, 1,000, 2,000, 10,000 to promote people of groups that just so happen to be primarily minorities. That's the thing. It's not the law enforcement that is racist, generally, in the United States at this moment. Once again, past is different. It's not the law enforcement that is racist generally, but it's the system that is quite racist. And so that's the differentiation there. Just the quick explanation. But also, next topic, you also got to look at the inconsistency of drug laws. Look at the fact that alcohol is legal. This is going to sound insane to many of you, but dealers, you got to go on the street or you got to order it online. But you got to take a bunch of risks in order to get that heroin as well. So you've also got those problems. And also, look at cocaine. Cocaine, body part a bunch because it feels good, I guess. And I could definitely imagine that because I've used MDMA. And this is true with LSD too. When I'm using LSD, I'll often run my hands through my hair. Not like anything forcefully. Like, I once watched this video of a guy that was on methamphetamine. He uploaded it, and I guess he had overdosed. It was like some news thing. Bleeding. He had sleeping for several days. And you're just binging methamphetamine at super high doses, and you're just totally just wrecking your skin. That's not something that happens to the average person that uses methamphetamine. There are actually, this is because I've met people in the past that have admitted to previously using methamphetamine, and they were totally normal people. You see, abusive and binge stuff, not getting water, you're essentially breaking down, and your body's using your fat, your muscle, you're burning your fat and muscle and losing it because your body's got to derive energy from somewhere, and you're not sleeping at all either, because the methamphetamine, when you smoke it, the effects, they linger. The drug lingers in your system and keeps you awake for a long time. But if you want to stay high, you have to keep smoking it and keep smoking it, or keep injecting it, or just keep consuming it. And so if you want to stay high, you are going to be awake for a really, really long time. That's why people will end up being awake for days. Anyway, that aside, methamphetamine, the effects that most people associate with the teeth only rot if you don't brush your teeth. Going back to those people that I mentioned that ate, they still drink water, sure that they didn't deteriorate. And I mean, you, at the very least, somewhat responsible meth user. I mean, if you're binging, you're probably not using meth in a responsible way, because binging in general is just not good for your health. You need nutrition, you need hydration, you need the water and all of, the sustenance to ensure that your body doesn't deteriorate and break down. And you need the sleep to ensure that your body is repaired, and inevitably, no matter what. One of the people in it, one of the researchers, not one of the meth users, but the meth users, they were given a dose of oral methamphetamine and oral dextroamphetamine. Because until you get beyond the moderate dosage, moderate dosage and below. So there's your little tidbit on dextroamphetamine and methamphetamine compared. Drop my little card again. Go over the cartels real quick again. Prohibition invites corruption. That's why a bunch of the people that are all throughout Mexico, but in the United States, and all throughout the world, and that those drugs are illegal. Some corrupt people in government. Not all of them, because after all, the government are the people. The people are the government. And most people are genuinely good people. But there are some. Government, the United States, has most certainly been proven to profit off of the illegal drug trade. And those few individuals that are profiting off of the illegal drug trade, they don't want these drugs to be legal. Because remember, when a drug is illegal, it is, at a minimum 2 to 3 times as expensive. Alcohol, back during alcohol prohibition, it was only 2 to 3 times as expensive, maybe 4 times as expensive as legal alcohol. But then you've also got cocaine, which legal cocaine in Colombia is only $3 per gram about, whereas legal or illegal cocaine in the United States about 20 to 40 times about 20 to is what I'm referring to. And so the drug prices, they're way higher. And so those people that are corrupt in government, they don't want these drugs through illegal at such a high price. And the drugs that they are selling, they don't have to go through any regulations, any safety standards, any procedures that ensure that they're safe. So they also have a higher profit margin because the drugs themselves are cheaper. They have no regulations that are making the price of the drug itself higher, but because it's illegal, there's an immense fee tacked on for, the cost of evading detection from authorities. And that's kind of ironic considering that if it's the government that is selling these drugs in some scenarios, they're essentially getting paid to evade themselves. That is quite interesting. Anyway, next, you've got there are some more topics I can go over, but here's what I do know. Back in World War I, the United States forced a bunch of other countries to Nixon administration. I'm pretty certain they did force some countries and cracks in certain some drug, a category of drugs, or, maybe a list of drugs. The United States has forced a lot of countries to prohibit drugs through contracts, and they've also encouraged many other countries, which, going back to what I was just talking about, the Nixon administration in the 60s encouraged a bunch of other countries to prohibit drugs, and many